Nehemiah 6, verse 15. So the wall was completed on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. It took them less than 2 months when they finally got around to it and set their minds and hands to do it, and they got a plan to do it. They all worked together at different parts of the wall simultaneously. It took them less than 2 months to finally get this done. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. So they were opposing the plans of Israel's God. And they know it too, because there's no way that this work would have been done without the help of Israel's God. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. So he had allies in the city, this Tobiah dude. For many in Judah were under oath to him, since he was son-in-law to Shechaniah, son of Erah, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. So there's a lot of intermarriage there that's keeping at the very least, their loyalties are divided. They may genuinely want to see the wall rebuilt and the city of Jerusalem prosper, but they also have family ties to Tobiah, who does not want these things. So even if there may not be enemy spies per se, actively 100% hostile to Nehemiah, they still have divided loyalties at best. Moreover, they kept reporting to me Tobiah's good deeds, and then telling him what I said. And Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. So they're trying to win over Nehemiah, trying to convince him that Tobiah is not that bad a dude, even though Tobiah is trying to kill him. After the wall had been rebuilt, and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers and the singers and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanani, the guy who first came to Nehemiah back at the beginning of the book with the report of what was going on in Jerusalem. So I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel. So Hanani be kind of like the mayor. Nehemiah is the governor of Judah. So Hanani be kind of like the mayor of Jerusalem. And Hananiah is kind of like the captain, the police chief almost. Captain of the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most men do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also, appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts, and some near their own houses. I'm not clear. There is some debate on the translation about whether the command was to open the gates during the hot time of the day or to close them during the hot time of the day. It seems to me like it'd make more sense to close the gates during the hot time of the day when your sensors are lulled and the guards may not be operating at peak efficiency. This translation says they're supposed to be opened when the sun is hot. Other translations will say they're supposed to be closed when the sun is hot. So I'm not sure about that. At any rate, even though the wall is now built and the gates are in place, there's still vigilance. They still have to be on the lookout. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and houses had not yet been rebuilt. There would have been some. We read back in Haggai that the high priest and the governor, and Joshua and Zerubbabel at the time, were building their own houses, which would have been in the city. So there would have been some. But there's not enough. With the walls down, most people are not going to want to live here. Back in this day and time, in this era, a big city like this would not have been populated if it didn't have a wall, because these people wouldn't have wanted to live in a city that didn't have a wall on it. So there would have been some, but there wouldn't have been enough to fill the city. So my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. We're going to find out. Now we're going to skip to something else in Nehemiah 8, 9, and 10. When we get back to this in Nehemiah 11, we're going to find out that they're going to draft people to come and move to Jerusalem. Of the people who aren't currently living there, they're going to cast lots and get one out of every 10 families to come and move to Jerusalem. That's why they're doing this. For some reason, we don't go right into that. We have an interlude in chapters 8, 9, and 10 about something else completely. But that's what they're doing. They're gathering the people and checking their registrations and the genealogies to get a list of all the families, and then they're going to cast lots to see which families are going to be basically forced to move to Jerusalem to fill it up. So my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found the genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. These are the people of the this is basically from Ezra 2, by the way. One of the reasons why we know the books of Ezra and Nehemiah are closely linked to each other is because Nehemiah basically is reading from Ezra 2 here. This is what I found written there. These are the people of the province who came up from captivity, the captivity of the exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town, in company with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, obviously not this Nehemiah, Azariah, Ramiah, Nahamani, Mordecai, not the Mordecai of Esther, Bilshan, Mispereth, Bigvai, Nahum, and Bana. Now we've read all this before because this all comes from Ezra 2, but we're going to read it again. The list of the men of Israel. The descendants of Parosh, 2172, of Shephatiah, 372, of Era, 652, of Pahath Moab, through the line of Jeshua and Joab, 2818, of Elam, 1254, of Zatu, 845, of Zakkai, 760, of Benwi, 648, of Bebai, 628, of Asgad, 2322, of Adonikam, 667, one more than that, 666, huh? Of Bigvai, 2067, of Aden, 655, of Ater through Hezekiah, 98, of Hashum, 328, of Bezai, 324, of Harith, 119, of Gibeon, 95. That's just one part of the list. We're not near done yet. The men of Bethlehem and Netophath, 188. Of Anathoth, 128. Of Beth Asmaveth, 42. Of Kiriath Jearim, Kipharah, and Berioth, 743. Of Ramah and Geva, 621. Of Michmash, 122. Of Bethel and Ai, 123. Of the other Nebo, 52. Of the other Elam, 1254. Of Haram, 320. Of Jericho, 345. Of Lod, Hadad, and Ono, 721. Of Senah, 3930. That's the biggest number we've seen so far. You have to remember, Ezra and Nehemiah as a whole is interested in showing these people as being forming a second Exodus. So everything in these books is kind of patterned after the first Exodus, the law, when Moses was evil out of Egypt, including the Numbers. Remember when we read through Numbers? The book of Numbers is a book of numbers, and there are these lists of numbers of the tribes and all their fighting men and all that. So we've seen the law, okay, we've seen attention paid to the law, we've seen attention paid to the covenant and the kingship and the temple and all that, and Ezra and Nehemiah. Now we're seeing attention to the numbers. We've seen Ezra come up with a tribe of people that represented all of Israel, the 12 families, and then a high priest family, a regular priest family, and a Levite family. He was very consistent on that. When he first got started, he didn't have a Levite representation, and he felt he had to have that. They already had Levites in Jerusalem, but he felt in his mind that he had to have Levites with him as he made his journey to represent the full covenant people of Israel. So like this book is designed to show that, hey, this is the second Exodus. We're a remnant. We're the remnant that Isaiah talked about, Jeremiah. Okay, it's like we're still the covenant people of God even after all that's happened. And just like Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt in the first Exodus, coming out of Babylon and back into the land now represents the second Exodus. The priests, the descendants of Jediah to the family of Jeshua, 973, of Immer, 1052, of Pashur, 1247, of Harim, 1017. The Levites, the descendants of Jeshua through Kadmiel to the line of Hodaviah, 74. Not very many of those. Nobody really wanted to go back to chop wood. It's like the Levites had the low-class, blue-collar, unpleasant jobs, and they weren't really that excited about going back to do that again. That's why when Ezra started on his journey initially, he didn't have any Levites with him. Well, because it was hard to find people who wanted to go back to being a Levite. The singers, the descendants of Asaph, 148. The gatekeepers, the descendants of Shallum, Ater, Talmon, Akub, Hatta, and Shobai, 138. The temple servants, oh boy, the descendants of Ziha, Hasufa, Tabaoth, Kiros, Sia, Padon, Lebanah, Hagabah, Shalmai, Hanan, Gidel, Gahar, Raya, Rezin, Nakoda, Gazaim, Uzzah, Pascha, Besai, Meunim, Nefushim, Bakbuk, Hakupa, Harher, Bakluth, Mehida, Harsha, Barko, Sisera, Tima, Neziah, and Hataha. The descendants of the servants of Solomon, the descendants of Sotai, Sophereth, Perida, Jara, Darkon, Gedal, Shephatiah, Hatil, Pokereth, Hazabaim, and Amon. The temple servants and the descendants of the temple of Solomon, the temple servants and the descendants of the servants of Solomon, 392. The following came up from the towns of Tel Mala, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Adon, and Immer, but they could not show that their families were descended from Israel. The descendants of Deliah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, 642. And from among the priests, the descendants of Hobiah, Hakaz, and Barzillai, a man who had married a daughter of Barzillai the Gileadite and was called by that name. These searched for their family records, but they could not find them, and so they were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor, therefore, this is not Nehemiah because this is beforehand, this is probably Zerubbabel, maybe even that Sheshbazzar, the first guy who came with them. And this was the list from back when they first came up back to the land, and 90 years ahead before this. So this is not this Nehemiah. The governor therefore ordered them not to eat any of the most sacred food until there should be a priest ministering with the Urim and the Thummim. Now, we've never gotten a follow-up on that. That was 90 years ago, by the way. This list comes from Ezra 2, which refers to when they came up out of the land from Babylon in 538 BC. This is now sometime after 444 BC. That's all 90 years, 85 plus years afterwards. The temple's been built for over 50 years now, over 60 years. But we don't get a follow-up on the Urim and the Thummim. I don't know if they ever consulted that again or not. Remember those things? They're the weird rocks or whatever that the priest had in his breastplate, and they would consult them. They would be like a form of casting lots or rolling the dice, and they assumed that whatever question they asked of God, he would manipulate the casting of these stones to reveal his will to an answer to their question. And that was back in the days of Moses and Aaron. They set that system up way back when they were first coming out of Egypt. And that lasted for about 500 years until the time of the kings. Even David, we read about David consulting the word of the Lord through these simple, yes, no, either or questions, which he would have gotten from the Urim and the Thummim. Then the prophets started coming and attaching themselves to the kings, and the prophets spoke the word of God to the kings and the people more directly. So the Urim and the Thummim kind of faded with time. And as far as I can tell, they never consulted the Urim and the Thummim in this case, because here in Nehemiah, 90 years later, they don't have an update on that. The whole company numbered 42,360, Besides, there is 7,337 men servants and maid servants, and they also had 245 men and women singers. These are not the temple singers. These are just singers for entertainment, house singers. There were 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. Some of the heads of the families contributed to the work. The governor gave to the treasury 1,000 drachmas of gold, 50 bowls, and 530 garments for priests. Some of the heads of the families gave to the treasury for the work 20,000 drachmas of gold and 2,200 minas of silver. The total given by the rest of the people was 20,000 drachmas of gold, 2,000 minas of silver, and 67 garments for priests. The priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, and the temple servants, along with certain of the people and the rest of the Israelites, settled in their own town. So that's a list that comes from Ezra 2. That is inserted here from elsewhere, and this is not part of the current narrative of Nehemiah.